The big three Australian teams continue to stamp their dominance on the ANZ Championship, comfortably occupying the top three rungs on the ladder, while the defending champions, the Magic, look set for some big challenges in the coming weeks as they desperately try to avoid the dreaded premiership curse. As I say hello and welcome to Centre Pass, the official video podcast of the ANZ Championship. Dan Ryan here alongside former Australian captain Kath Harby-Williams. And Catherine, some big news over the past 24 hours with former Queensland Firebirds coach Vicki Wilson recently appointed as the assistant coach of the New Zealand Silver Ferns. The New Zealand Silver Ferns.
And that's not a mistake. We know Dan makes errors at times, but I've got to say, as a teammate of Vicki and knowing the competitive beast she is and how proud she was to represent her country, I can't believe it. And even as a player myself, and I've lived in New Zealand for 8 years, I still couldn't do it. I still couldn't cross the line and go and help the enemy, because that's what they are. You know, if she wanted to help out Singapore or Barbados, that's fine. So it would have been a tough decision for Vicki. I know that Netball Australia wanted her assisting the Australian netball team, but she has decided to help the Silver Ferns. They'll benefit enormously, and it's a very sad day in Australian netball, the fact that one of its legends is going to help New Zealand in their quest to win Commonwealth and World Championship gold. Yeah,
huge loss for Australian netball, that is no doubt about that. And how about the fact that Catherine Latu and Irene Van Dyke potentially both struggling at the moment, and to get the tutelage of Vicki Wilson, that is a huge plus.
And that's probably prompted Netball New Zealand to really look at their list. They've got Waitamanu, she was one of the best defenders going around in her day, so defensively they've got that covered. And now they've got one of the best shooters that's gone around in the history of the game. So, you know, as a hierarchy, they've really obviously looked at their list and thought, you know, that attacking end needs some work. Let's go and chase one of the best, and they've achieved their goal. So it's one up for New Zealand, unfortunately, at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Plenty of action happening in World Netball, as well the ANZ Championship. Let's recap all of the results from round 8 of the competition. On Saturday afternoon, the Queensland Firebirds kept their impressive record in New Zealand intact, defeating the Canterbury Tactics 76-51. The Melbourne Vixens fought off a gallant New South Wales Swifts outfit, a team they didn't beat last year, to take an 8-goal win in Sydney. The Adelaide Thunderbirds held on for a 2-goal win over a fast-finishing and tenacious West Coast Fever team in Perth. The Southern Steel notched up another win, defeating the Northern Mystics by 10 goals, 73-63. And the Magic keeping their finals aspirations alive to reverse the results from a fortnight ago, beating the Pulse by 4 goals in Hamilton. As we take a look at the competition ladder as it stands after 8 rounds, Kath, the top 3 teams starting to break away, but perhaps the Magic and the Steel looking to fight for that 4th spot, and they meet this weekend.
Yes, so that will probably shape the season for one of those sides. But don't discount the Pulse. They're 1 game below, but they've got a really easy run home, so they could possibly win every game for the remainder of the season. So they're still in the running. But I think we can safely say, Dan, that it's going to be 3 Australian sides and 1 New Zealand side. It's still hard to go past the Magic. Look what they did last year. They struggled early, then they won 14 in a row. They're not playing that badly, but they've still got scope to move. They've got Van Dyke, who's not playing to her potential. Their defenders, Kopua and De Bruyne, they can get better. So if they do make it through, they'll still certainly shape that final 4 by the end of the year.
Okay, let's turn our attention to round 9 of the competition. It starts on Saturday in Invercargill, probably one of the biggest games of the round. The Southern Steel hosting the Magic, as we just mentioned. Both teams coming off respective wins, a 4-goal win for the Magic, a 10-goal win for the Steel. The winner of this one, Catherine, will take outright 4th. So it's a huge game in the context of both team seasons.
It is, and you could probably say that because Magic have the experience, they may well get one up on the Steel, but it's in Invercargill, and I've been down there, Dan, and they are nuts, and it's almost like the Steel play with 8 players. We know that Fowler's going to shoot a lot of goals, but the feed is what the Magic will be stopping, and so they'll be aiming for Brown. Wendy Frew's really added a lot. She's come back after the birth of a child, so defensively and attack-wise she'll add something to the Steel. But I just think the Magic are slowly on the rise, so I think they'll get over that game in a tight one, because they know that their finals chances hinge on it.
So that's the first game of the round. The Southern Steel hosting the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic. Looking forward to that one. Our next game will be on Sunday in Adelaide. The Adelaide Thunderbirds currently top of the table, up against the ninth place New South Wales Swifts. 2 very opposite teams coming into this. The Swifts on a 6-game losing streak. The Thunderbirds 6-game winning streak. Form will say it's probably a win to the Thunderbirds, but you just can't underestimate the Swifts because of the calibre of players they have.
No, you can't, but I guess we've been waiting all season for them to come good, but it just looks like they're struggling in all areas, and I just can't see them breaking breaking free and thinking this is the game where they're going to hit form. I think the Thunderbirds are playing too well. The Swifts struggle to shoot goals. You know, they're number 9 in terms of the number of goals they shoot, which is 49, and they're up against one of the best defensive sides in the competition. So I just don't think they've got enough firepower to get over the Thunderbirds.
They've met 11 previous times and the Thunderbirds lead the head-to-head 6-5. So history tells us it should be a good game, but we'll wait and see how that one unfolds. The next game on Sunday is another important one. The second place Melbourne Vixens up against the third place Queensland Firebirds. Both teams winners in round 8. Of course, this is the first time they've met this year. Only the second time the Firebirds are facing a top 4 team, so another test for them to see how they really shape up.
Well, isn't that funny? Because we assume they're going to make the finals, and if they do, how good are they? But they haven't really been tested, so this is a true test. They unfortunately probably won't have their captain, Laura Geitz, who lost her father during the week, so everyone's thinking of her because she's a highly respected player. But the players may lift in terms of emotion and do it for their captain. It's the best attacking side against the best defensive side. So in terms of the context of that, it's going to be an absolute cliffhanger. It's hard to pick a winner. Vixens are at home, so I just think maybe that favours them slightly, but it's a hard one to pick, and I'm not very good with the tipping, so I won't.
No, you're certainly not, Hubs. Chelsea Pittman also hopeful of a return from an ankle injury in this game against the Vixens, so we'll see if she can make a difference in the midcourt. Another game on Sunday will be the Canterbury Tactics, currently ranked 8th up against the 6th place West Coast Fever. The Fever, we know, tend to go pretty well against New Zealand sides. This really is a must-win for them to stay in touch with the top 4, no doubt.
Yeah, it is. If you look at that statistic is true, but Fever don't travel well either, and they are playing against the Tactics in New Zealand, so that's a tough gig, I guess, for the Fever. But the Tactics also struggle against Australian sides, and you know they've got Joe Hart, and some players are sort of, I guess, lifting their performance at times, but they just don't have the consistency. The Fever showed some promise against the Thunderbirds last week, and I think they'll be going to the game with some confidence. So I think with the Bassett-Cox combination particularly, they'll be too strong for the Tactics defenders.
An important matchup too will be the 2 English teammates, Emily Beckford-Chambers up against Joe Hart, and both real barometers for their side, and fair to say 2 very informed players this year.
Absolutely, and that will be very important. Obviously the Tactics really need Harton to get on top of Beckford-Chambers, but Beckford-Chambers was very good for the Fever against the Thunderbirds last week, and she's played pretty consistently over the course of the season. So you could say that they'll probably nullify each other, so therefore that's a major detriment for the Tactics side.
Final game of the round will be played on Monday night in Porirua. Of course, the Central Pulse, currently ranked just outside the top 4. They take on the last placed Northern Mystics. Both teams coming off losses. The Pulse still hurting after that round 5 loss to the Mystics, but this is a time they have to get the win and have to get it right in this 60 minutes.
Yes, and I think Robin Broughton is really hurting, because if you look at their games this year, 7 out of their 8 games, Dan, they've been leading, and by a reasonable margin at times. They've only gone on to win 3 of those. So Robin Broughton said, look, I can cope if the opposition get better, or you know that they're just outplaying us, but when it comes down to basic error rate, costs you the game, that really frustrates her. So I know that she's getting quite frustrated with her team, and they're quite experienced, so you'd think the likes of Leota, Thwaites and Wilkins would lift their game in that area, but they still struggle when there's pressure on. So it's a hard one to pick. Mystics, you know, they're struggling. Latu's really struggling, so Bailey Mez has come in, but she's certainly contributed, shot 37 goals on the weekend, so it's not as if they're missing out there. But the Pulse really need it, and that may well push them over the edge in this one.
Certainly important game for the Central Pulse. Time now to turn our attention to our tipping competition. We love big news here on Centre Pass. I've jumped ahead by 3. Kath, you're struggling, you're out of form. Take us through your tips for round 9 of the competition.
When you're in chase mode, Dan, you just have to go for it, and you make too many mistakes.
I think you're trying too hard, Kath. You're trying too hard.
T-Birds over the Swifts, Vixens over the Firebirds, Fever over the Tactics, Pulse over the Mystics, and the first game which I've missed there, Magic over the Steel. How's that?
Very good, just as I'm doing, Harb. So Magic, T-Birds, Vixens, Fever and the Pulse for me. Well, that's all we have time for this week's episode of Centre Pass. Thank you very much for joining us. Make sure you check out the ANZ Champs website for all of the broadcast details for round 9 of the competition. We'll catch you next week. Enjoy the netball.